Welcome to another deep dive.
Oh, yeah.
Today, we're tackling something that might make your jaw drop.
Okay.
Squatters' rights.
Interesting.
You've sent in some YouTube videos from real estate pros, legal experts, even a news story from North Carolina.
Wow.
Clearly, you're as intrigued by this legal gray area as I am.
It's definitely a topic that sparks a lot of questions and even some misconceptions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe you own property and have heard some wild stories, or maybe you're just curious about how this whole thing actually works.
Right.
Whatever brought you here, get this.
Yes, okay.
In California, there's a chance a squatter could actually end up owning the place.
It's called adverse possession.
Wow.
And while it's not common,
Okay.
it has happened.
Really?
Our sources actually highlight a case where a squatter managed to gain ownership of a valuable property using a rather unusual tactic.
Okay, now I have to know more about this.
Yeah.
But before we get into that,
Sure.
let's start with the basics. What exactly defines a squatter?
Okay.
Is it just someone who doesn't pay rent?
Not quite.
Okay.
All three sources emphasize the core criteria. No permission,
Okay.
no lease,
Okay.
no rent.
Okay.
They have to be on the property without any legal right to be there.
So, like, that guy in the two-door property management video hiding under a desk pretending to be a squatter?
It definitely highlights the length some people might go to,
Yeah.
but it also underscores the key point. There can't be any agreement, implied or otherwise, between the squatters and the property owner.
Okay.
And it's not just limited to houses either.
Right.
We were talking land, commercial buildings, really any type of property.
Wow. So theoretically, someone could set up camp on an empty lot and try to claim it.
Theoretically, yes. But let's get back to that fascinating case of adverse possession you mentioned.
Okay.
In California. The law requires 5 years of continuous occupancy,
Okay.
paying property taxes, and making their presence open and notorious.
Okay, so more than just crashing there, you got to act like you own the place.
Right.
What does open and notorious even mean in this context?
It means they can't be hiding their presence.
Okay.
Visible improvements to the property, regular comings and goings, even having mail delivered.
Okay.
Basically, acting in a way that would make any reasonable person believe they are the rightful owner.
So no sneaking around in the shadows. They have to be pretty bold about it.
Yeah.
And they have to pay property taxes, too.
Yes.
That seems counterintuitive.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But the idea is that to claim ownership, they have to fulfill the obligations of ownership, including paying taxes.
Okay.
But here's where it gets interesting. In this particular case, the squatters didn't just pay the taxes. They actually went a step further and sued the actual owner for not paying.
Wait, hold on.
Yeah.
They sued the real owner.
Yeah.
That's a bold move.
It was a risky legal strategy, but it worked.
Really?
The court ultimately ruled in the squatters' favor, granting them ownership of the property.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It seems like the squatters had a good lawyer and knew how to play the system.
Yeah.
But let's be honest. The odds of pulling that off must be slim, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Statistically, adverse possession is rare.
Right.
But as this case demonstrates, it can happen.
Okay.
Which is why understanding the rules is crucial,
Right.
whether you're a property owner or just fascinated by the law.
Okay, so let's say you're a property owner and you find someone's made themselves a little too comfortable in your vacant rental. What can you actually do about it?
Well, it's definitely not as simple as changing the locks and hoping for the best.
Right.
Our sources, especially the video from Fast Evict, a legal firm specializing in evictions,
Okay.
make it clear that there's a very specific process you have to follow.
I'm guessing it's not a quick and easy process, is it?
Not at all. And this is where understanding the nuances of the law really comes into play.
Okay.
You can't just assume someone is squatting.
Right.
You have to prove it.
So receipts, lease agreements, anything that shows they're not supposed to be there.
Right.
What happens next?
Then comes serving notices,
Okay.
which is more complex than it sounds.
Okay.
You can't just write a note saying, get out.
Right.
Specific legal documents have to be used, and they have to be served in accordance with the law.
Okay, now it's starting to sound like a legal minefield.
It can be.
One wrong step and the whole thing could fall apart.
Exactly.
Wow.
And that's just the beginning.
Okay.
If the squatter doesn't leave after being served, things can escalate to court proceedings.
So even if you're certain someone's squatting, you can't just call the police and have them removed?
Unfortunately, no.
Okay.
Evicting a squatter is a civil matter, not a criminal one.
Right.
It's about proving they are unlawfully occupying your property.
Right.
And that takes time and documentation.
This is really eye-opening. I had no idea the eviction process was so involved.
It is.
And according to our sources, California law can make this drag on for quite a while.
Absolutely.
Right.
The True Door property management video mentions a time frame of 45 to 60 days
Okay.
just to get a sheriff's lockout,
Wow.
assuming everything goes smoothly,
Right.
which it rarely does.
So this could potentially take months to resolve.
It's definitely possible,
Wow.
especially if the squatter challenges the eviction
Okay.
or raises legal defenses.
Uh-huh.
Proving the criteria for eviction isn't always straightforward,
Right.
and squatters often know how to work this system to their advantage.
This is all so fascinating.
Yeah,
But I have to admit, I'm starting to feel a little nervous for property owners out there.
I understand.
Are there any red flags or early warning signs they should be aware of?
That's a great question, and one our sources address directly. Let's dive into that right after a quick break.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of squatters' rights.
Definitely a lot more to it than meets the eye.
Yeah.
You mentioned some red flags property owners should look out for. What exactly are we talking about?
Well, one of our sources, the True Door property management video, highlighted a few things that can tip you off that something might be amiss.
Okay.
For instance,
Yeah.
keep an eye out for any signs of forced entry,
Okay.
like broken windows or damaged locks.
So even if it seems minor,
Yeah.
don't just ignore it.
Exactly. It's always better to investigate and make sure everything is secure.
Right.
Another red flag they mention is changes to the property's appearance.
Yet what? Fresh paint?
Well, this could be signs of a legitimate tenant,
Okay.
but sudden unexplained alterations to the property's exterior,
Okay.
especially if it's been vacant,
Right.
warrant a closer look.
Oh.
It could be an attempt by a squatter to establish a more permanent presence. That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's all about being observant and noticing anything out of the ordinary.
Right.
What about mail?
Oh, yeah.
Is that something to pay attention to?
Absolutely.
Okay.
If mail is piling up,
Uh-huh.
it's a sign that no one is regularly checking on the property.
Right.
That's a big red flag for potential squatters.
So basically the key takeaway here is out of sight, out of mind is a risky strategy for property owners, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Regular visits,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's just a quick drive-by,
Okay.
can make a huge difference in deterring squatters and catching any issues early on.
Okay. That's great advice for prevention.
Yeah.
But let's say the worst has happened and you do find a squatter on your property.
Okay.
What happens next?
Right.
Walk us through that legal process again.
Well, the first step is to gather evidence that proves the person is trespassing.
Okay.
This includes documentation showing you own the property
Mm-hmm.
and that the squatter has no legal right to be there.
So, property deeds, lease agreements, that sort of thing.
Exactly.
Right.
And remember, it's crucial to avoid any direct confrontation with the squatter.
Okay.
Everything should be handled through legal channels
Uh-huh.
with documentation every step of the way.
Okay, so no showing up at the property and demanding they leave.
Definitely not.
Okay.
That can not only escalate the situation,
Right?
but also potentially weaken your case.
Okay.
It's important to maintain a calm, professional demeanor throughout the process.
So what's next? You mentioned serving notices earlier.
Right. Once you have sufficient evidence,
Okay.
the next step is to formally notify the squatter that they are trespassing and must vacate the property.
And these notices have to be very specific, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
They must comply with California law,
Uh-huh.
outlining the squatter's rights
Okay.
and the legal consequences of remaining on the property.
Right.
And serving these notices isn't as simple as slipping a letter under the door.
Right.
There are specific rules and procedures that must be followed to ensure they are legally valid.
So certified mail,
Yes.
process servers, that sort of thing.
Exactly.
Okay.
And remember, documentation is key at every stage.
Mm-hmm.
Keep records of all attempts to serve the notices,
Okay.
any correspondence with the squatter,
Uh-huh.
and any other relevant information.
Okay, so it's all about dotting your I's and crossing your T's.
Yeah.
What happens if the squatter ignores the notices and refuses to leave?
Well, that's when things can get more complicated and potentially end up in court.
Okay.
You'll need to file an unlawful detainer lawsuit,
Right.
which is a formal legal process to evict someone from a property.
And I'm guessing this involves lawyers,
Hmm.
court dates,
Yes.
and a whole lot of legal back and forth.
You got that right.
Oh, wow.
It can be a lengthy and expensive process,
Okay.
but it's often the only way to legally remove a squatter who refuses to leave voluntarily.
So for property owners, it really does pay to be proactive and prevent squatting in the first place, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Prevention is key, and understanding the legal process is crucial if you do find yourself in this situation.
All right.
But there's another side to this story we need to explore.
Okay.
The squatter's perspective.
Right, because not all squatters are malicious or trying to exploit the system.
Exactly.
Right.
And the legal landscape can be quite different depending on their intentions and actions.
Okay.
For instance,
Yeah.
remember that news story you sent from North Carolina?
The one where a group of people were living in a seemingly abandoned house.
Yeah.
That case really threw me for a loop because it highlighted the blurry line between squatting and trespassing.
Didn't it?
Yeah.
Because even though they were living there without permission,
Right.
they weren't claiming ownership. That subtle difference had huge legal implications.
So even though they were essentially doing the same thing,
Right.
living on someone else's property without permission, the fact that they weren't trying to claim ownership meant it wasn't considered squatting.
Exactly.
Wow.
They were treated as trespassers,
Okay.
which falls under a completely different area of the law.
And that changes everything, right?
It does.
Because trespassing is a criminal offense, whereas squatting is a civil matter.
Precisely.
Okay.
In that North Carolina case, the police were able to intervene and remove the trespassers much more quickly and efficiently than if they had been classified as squatters.
So intent really does matter in these cases.
It does.
It's not just about physical presence, but about the legal claims being made.
That's a great point.
Okay.
And it underscores why understanding the nuances of the law is so crucial in these situations,
Yeah.
both for property owners and for anyone who might find themselves on the other side of the equation.
All this talk about legal processes and court battles is making my head spin.
Yeah, it can be complicated.
But before we dive into the societal implications of squatting,
Okay.
I'm curious about something.
Yeah. Are there ever situations where a squatter might actually have a legal defense for their actions? That's an excellent question. Okay. And one that deserves a closer look. Okay. Let's unpack that right after a quick break. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into squatters' rights.
Before the break, we were discussing the complexities of the legal process and the importance of intent when determining if someone is a squatter or a trespasser.
Right.
You raised a really interesting question.
Yeah.
Are there ever situations where a squatter might actually have a legal defense for their actions?
That's a great question.
Because it's easy to assume that all squatters are breaking the law.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing it's not always that black and white.
You're absolutely right.
Okay.
There are certain circumstances where a squatter might be able to argue a legal defense.
Okay.
One example mentioned in our sources is the concept of implied permission.
Okay, what does that mean?
Well, imagine a scenario where someone has been living in a property for an extended period with the knowledge and apparent consent of the owner, even without a formal lease agreement.
So maybe a family member.
Right.
Or a close friend who's fallen on hard times.
Exactly.
Okay.
If the owner has never objected to their presence or taken steps to evict them, the squatters might argue that they had implied permission to be there.
So it's not just about a written contract,
Right.
but about the actions and behavior of both parties.
Precisely.
Oh.
Of course, proving implied permission can be tricky,
Right.
and it often comes down to the specific facts of the case.
Yeah.
But it is a potential legal defense that squatters can raise.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
It shows how even in these seemingly clear-cut legal situations, there can be shades of gray.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this is where understanding the nuances of the law is so important,
Right.
both for property owners who need to protect their rights and for individuals who might find themselves facing eviction.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
From the legal definition of squatting to the complexities of the eviction process.
Yeah.
And even explored some potential legal defenses.
Right.
It's definitely a topic that raises a lot of questions.
Yeah.
And can even spark some heated debate.
It can.
It certainly has. And
Yeah.
that's what makes it so interesting.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up,
Okay.
I think it's important to acknowledge the broader societal implications of squatting.
Okay.
It's not just about legal technicalities.
Right.
It touches on issues of housing, poverty,
Yeah.
and social justice.
Absolutely.
It's easy to point fingers and say squatters are breaking the law.
Right.
But I think it's crucial to understand the desperation that might drive someone to take such drastic measures.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
For some people, squatting might be the only option they see when faced with homelessness or the inability to afford a safe and stable place to live.
So while it's important for property owners to protect their rights,
Yes,
it's equally important to have compassion for those who are struggling and to advocate for systemic changes that address the root causes of these issues.
well said.
Things like increasing the availability of affordable housing,
Yeah.
providing support services for those experiencing homelessness,
Right.
and creating pathways out of poverty.
These are complex challenges,
Right.
but they're essential to address if we want to create a more just and equitable society where everyone has access to safe and affordable housing.
Well said.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that legal issues are often intertwined with social and economic factors, and that solutions require a multifaceted approach.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it underscores the importance of informed and compassionate dialogue,
Right.
even when discussing topics that can be as contentious as squatters' rights.
Well, on that note, I think we've done a pretty thorough deep dive into this fascinating and complex topic.
Yeah.
We've explored the legal definitions, the processes, the potential defenses, and even touched on the broader societal implications.
It's been a great discussion.
Yeah.
And I hope our listeners have gained a deeper understanding of this often misunderstood area of the law.
Me too.
Yeah.
And as always, we encourage our listeners to continue exploring these issues, asking questions, and engaging in thoughtful conversations about the challenges facing our communities.
Because ultimately, it's through understanding empathy and a willingness to find solutions that we can create a more just and equitable world for everyone.
Well said.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of squatters' rights.
My pleasure.
Until next time, stay curious and stay engaged.
Call now 714-442-9741. Thank you.